In this video, I'm going to talk about testing support provided by Spring. Firstly, let us discuss about when to use Spring testing support. Can I use it in unit testing? Let us see. So generally, your applications will be having layers. Data access layer, as you know, service layer, presentation layer. Now, to test my services are dependent on data access code, data access DAOs or repositories. Now, to do a unit testing of services, what we should do? Shall I actually inject the original repositories into services or shall I mock them? Generally in unit tests, what we do is we mock the repositories and we inject the mocks into services and then we do the unit testing. But in integration testing, what we do is we inject the original repositories into services, but the database might be a test database. Is it? So in unit testing, we should not inject the original dependencies. We should use mocks. And we should make sure that whenever we are doing unit testing, the dependencies for our testing class should be minimal. So it is recommended not to use Spring for unit testing because Spring itself is again an additional dependencies. So your unit test should not fail because of some configuration problems in Spring. So you are not recommended to use Spring in unit testing. Better go with some mocking frameworks for unit testing. When it comes to integration testing, for injecting the original repositories into the services or for injecting the data sources into repositories, you can take help of Spring. Okay, so once you understand that you can use Spring support for integration testing, let us see. This was a test case which we were running earlier. What we were doing in the before method, in the method annotated with before, we are creating application context, and then we were initializing this this bank service in this init method, and in the destroy method, in the method annotated with after, we are closing the context. Now suppose in my test case, suppose in my class, test class, I have two test methods. Okay, just each test method is testing for different scenarios, assume right now. Okay, now answer my question, how many times is this before method called in this case? Twice for each test method or only once? You know that the before method will be called before executing each and every test method. So it's called twice. So application context is created twice, which is not good because you know that application context creation takes time. It will be good if application context can be created only once. Okay, that's one problem. And also I don't want to create application context. I want it to be automatically created. Okay, so let me come to the point. I'll ask you another simple question. Whenever I was saying run as JUnit test, I can see that a graphical wizard, as graphical window is coming, which is showing me the failures or successes. How do you think this program is running? Is this having a main method? No. Then how can I run a Java code without main method? So actually, whenever you are running as JUnit test, there is something called as test runner. So test runners will be running the test cases. So in JUnit, there are some predefined test runners like command line based test runner, Swing UI based test runner, etc. So whenever you are running as JUnit through Eclipse or through STS, you are actually using Swing based UI test runner. So the test runner is executing all these test methods. But if I can write my own runner, actually let me just show you runner, sorry, test runner. Test runner is present in this jn.text UI. Text runner is a class and there are a lot of subclass of test runners. What you can do is you can write your own test runner by extending it. And you want your test cases to be executed with your own test runner. So what you can do is you can say run with, this is also a JUnit specific connotation, it is not Spring specific. Run with your own runner. You can specify run with and specify a class which is extending a runner. Is it? But in Spring, what they have done is they have come up with a predefined runner called as Spring JUnit for class runner. So in Spring, they have already written a class called a Spring JUnit for class runner, which is responsible for running all these test cases. So if you want to take Spring support for running test case, you can use run with Spring JUnit for test runner. And now we don't need this init method. I will comment out this part. But then who will create application context? The JUnit for class runner will create application context. By running which configuration files, I have to specify one more annotation: context config location, context configuration, context configuration, and here we need to specify classes. See here, classes is equals to an array. You can pass application config dot class comma infrastructure config dot class, right? So whenever I run the test case, this Spring JUnit for test JUnit for class runner will start. It will create an application context. Whatever we are doing here, it will create an application context by loading these two files. And then I want bank service, so I will use just auto wired. That's all. I don't need to do this. And also I don't need to do this. So what happens after all the test cases are executed, the context will be automatically closed by the class runner. We don't need to worry about anything. So let me run it now. See, the test case has succeeded, right? Okay. Now you have executed, you have taken Spring support and you have executed this integration test. Actually, you are injecting the original repositories into bank service, is it? So you have done an integration test of your services and repositories. Okay. So let me just go through this presentation. It is showing the same. And also one more thing. When we were not using Spring support for testing, what we did is we have configured these two beans earlier. We had to configure these two beans so that the script will be executed. Now we don't need this script. We can just comment out all this. We don't need this script. What I'll do is, whenever you are using Spring support for testing, if you want any scripts to be executed before the test case starts, you can use a notation simply called as @SQL, and you can specify the scripts is equals to, it is string array, I'll pass. So this script will be executed before the test case starts. Let me test if it really execute that scripts or not. So what I'll do is I'll go to my database and I'll drop this Spring DB and then I'll recreate it. Spring DB. Okay. Then is it present, the script? Yes. So let me run. Oh, I got an exception. What is it saying? No being named transaction manager defined. Okay. So see here, there is something called as script SQL test execution listener, which is executing the SQL scripts. So it is looking for something called as transaction manager. Maybe if any one of the script fails, you want a transaction to roll back. So whenever you are using this SQL annotation, it looks for a bean called as transaction manager. But see, my test case didn't fail, and I should see that. See here, the tables are created and everything is fine. Only thing is, it was checking for transaction manager bean. Don't worry about what is this transaction manager. In our next topics, we'll be seeing about what is this transaction manager. It is not mandatory, but it is checking for it. Okay. Now you understood that if you have any scripts to be executed while testing, you can just use it SQL. So this script will be executed before your test case starts, and all the data will be populated. So that is the reason in my infrastructure config I have commented out these bean definitions. Okay, so you understood about one basic thing. Next, suppose what you can do is, you don't want to specify the class names. So you just wrote context configuration. Now what you can do is, you can write a static inner class, public static class. I'll say my config is a public static class, my config, and annotate it with configuration. So by default, if you don't specify any configuration files here, it will use this as a configuration file. And now what I could do, I could import both import application config also, right? Import or keep it in curly braces because it's an error, right? So if you just specify context configuration, it will treat this static inner class as a configuration file. Right now I imported. Of course, what you could do, you could write all the beans related for this testing inside this class itself. You can write methods annotated with bean. Now just for simplifying, I have imported. Okay, so let me run. Yep, the test case executed successfully. So understand that whenever you are just using at configuration without specifying any configuration file, you can specify the configuration file as static inner class like this. Okay. And or instead of importing, can I do like this? I'll say component scan and base packages is equals to com.waitlearn online. So any class annotated with configuration is also a component. It will be component scanned. So other classes, these will be component scanned, they will be recognized. So let us check now if it still works. See, it still worked. These are the other options. Okay. So the next thing. Okay, suppose if you are having XML files, you don't have Java configuration files. If you are having XML files as configuration files, see here I have these two XML files, infrastructure and application config. So how to specify XML files, you can see here. Locations is equals to, it's an array. I can give class path : I have to keep it in double quotes. class path colon application dash config dot xml and also comma class path colon infrastructure dash config dot xml. So this is how I can give the XML files. Now let me run. Oh, I have specified this dollar my env. So what I'll do is, as of now, I'll hard code to use. Of course, I can pass through command line. I'm just right now hard coding. Okay, now in my XML, it will load from my XML. Let me run it again. See, it's okay, right? Okay. So now you understood how to use XML files as configuration files. Okay, now I want to do one more thing. I don't want to specify the XML file locations. Let us see what is the exception which is being thrown. It will throw an exception definitely because I didn't specify any Java configuration files or XML configuration files. Let me see the exception. What is it saying? It is saying you didn't specify locations or classes or nothing else. Is it? So if you see the console, is it printing the same information? Yes, let me maximize it. Could not detect the resource locations for test class. Here it says no resource found for suffixes dash context.xml. So by default, if you don't specify any XML, it will look for a file with name bank service test. The class name is what? Bank service tests dash context.xml in the same folder as the test case. So what I will do is I will create a new Spring Bean configuration file with same name bank service tests dash context.xml. Okay, in the same folder again, right? See here, it is looking for what? Something ending with dash context.xml. No resource found for suffixes. So I have written. Then what I'll do is I will import the two XML files here into this. Import resource is equals to class path colon application dash config dot xml, and also I will import one more infrastructure dash config dot xml. Now let me run the test case. I expect it to pick this file. Okay, so let me run. I'm not specifying anything XML or annotation case here. I am running it. Let me check if it works or not. It seems to be working. Yes, it worked. So whenever you just use context configuration without even specifying either XML configuration files or Java configuration files, it will look for a file with name same as a class name dash context.xml. That will be the main configuration file, right? Okay, now you understood some basics. And also whenever you are specifying the configuration files, the one file can use class path prefix or one file can use file prefix. It's up to you. Now how many application contexts are created in this case if you are using Spring Jaint for class runner? only one application context is created and is reused for each and every test method. But what if I want the application context to be recreated before executing this method? Sorry, not before executing, after executing this method. See, by default, all the beans are singletons. Assume that after executing this test method, I feel that the application context has to be recreated. Otherwise, it may affect the other tests. So if you want the application context to be recreated after executing this test case, what you can do, you can use an annotation called as dirties context. So if you have a method annotated with dirties context, that means you are telling that after executing this method, application context has to be recreated. Let me check how many times application context will be created right now in this case. See here, if you see the configurations, you can observe that application context could have been created twice. See, we are seeing same exception twice, is it? That means application context is created twice, right? The scripts are also executed twice. That means application context is created twice, is it? But can you guess who is actually creating application context? There is some listener called as dirties context test execution listener. So this test execution listener will listen for dirties context event. So whenever a test method is annotated with dirties context, it will generate an event after executing this method. A listener will execute, right? So if you want to write your own listener, of course you can write it. See how the existing listeners are written. In Spring Test, you have meta-inf, and somewhere here it will be Spring Factories. See here, test execution listener. So here all the execution listeners are configured. There is dirties context execution listener. The Spring framework will use these listeners. You can also write your own listener, and you can configure it inside Spring.Factories inside meta-inf. Your listener also will be picked up. And also you see here SQL scripts test execution listener. Hope you might now got an idea about who is executing the script whenever we are using SQL annotation. There is one listener called as SQL scripts test execution listener, which will execute the SQL scripts. Alright. Okay. And who is auto wiring? You can see here I have field annotated with auto wired. So the dependency injection is done by this test execution listener. So this is all related to the framework. You don't need to worry, but if you have to extend the framework, you may have to write your own listener. So whenever you want to write your own listener, you can just open this file, Spring.Factories, and you can just observe one of the configuration. See, this is an example listener. See, you can just see one of the listener and you can understand how it is written, and you can write your own in the same fashion, right? Okay. So hope now you have understood about how to test. Okay. Now I'll tell you one more thing in the same video. What are profiles? Profiles are used to group the related beans together. So let's assume that you have some beans related to development environment, some beans related to QA, some beans related to production, some beans related to web. So you want to group your beans based on your environment. So profiles can help you in that. Okay. Let us see how to group your beans first in XML configuration. Then I will show you in Java configuration. So for that, I have to I have this project. You can see here in this application config, you can see what I did. Inside beans tag, the root tag is beans. If you see for this XML, the root tag is beans. Inside beans tag, I can have nested beans tag. And what I have done is, see, I have some stub classes, right? I want these to be recognized only for a profile called as test. So all these beans belong to profile called as test, and all these beans I want them to be a part of prod, a profile called as prod. Okay, so I've grouped. Now if I create an application context, all the common beans will be loaded first. So these beans does not belong to any profile, they are common to all the profiles. So let me just open the test case. Here I have, see what I'm doing. I'm using context configuration. I'm specifying both XML files. Okay, so now which profile to load? I didn't specify any profile to be loaded. I will run this test case and observe what will happen. See, it is saying an exception is thrown. What is it saying? No qualifying bean of type account repository found for dependency. Could not auto wire. So it's trying to find a bean by type. In application config, did it define a bean called as bank service? Yes. But bank service is using auto wire. It is trying to find a bean of type account repository. Is there account repository which is not belonging to any profiles? No, right? You have account repository belonging to prod profile using JDBC, and this stub account repository for test. So since you didn't activate any of the profiles, it picks only the common beans. Now I want to activate a profile called as prod. So how to do it? On the top of test case, I can use activate profiles, and you can specify the profile name prod. Now let me run. It should pick only the beans belonging to prod and all the common beans. See, it succeeded. Is it? So if you want to activate a profile during testing, you have to use activate profiles. And you understood how to group the beans into profiles by using a profile attribute like this in XML, right? Okay, now how to use profile annotation, how to use profiles in Java configuration? Very simple. What you can do is, if you are having Java configuration files, say this infrastructure config, I want this infrastructure config to be used for production. So what I can do, I can use profile annotation, and I can specify this this configuration bean belongs to which profile. I'll say test or prod, whatever. So whatever beans defined inside this configuration file, will belong to this profile. Or what I could do is, instead of specifying the whole configuration file belongs to this profile, I could use profile annotation on top of the method also. Only this bean definition now belongs to this profile prod. So like that, you can specify which bean belongs to which profile by using the annotation called as profile annotation. Okay. And if you are not using testing, if you are running a Java application through command line, then what? To activate a profile, you can pass this environment variable spring.profiles.active. You can specify comma separated profiles as well. Even in annotations also, you can specify comma separated profiles. Let's say here like this, comma test. You can activate a number of profiles also like this. So you understood now. Whenever you are passing through command line, if you're running an application which is not a web application, or if it is not a test case, Then you can activate a profile by passing a system property like this. Or if you're running a web application, and in web application, if you want to specify what are all the active profiles in web.xml, this is a way to specify the context parameter, active profiles, right? Okay, so now you understood how to specify the active profiles. Okay, so now what you can do is you can just go through this lab documentation. I've given a clear documentation. Two documentations are the testing and also the one profiles. Go through these documentations and complete these exercises. I'll meet you in next video and we'll discuss about Spring Boot.